Morning came slowly to the edge of the county road. The sun climbed through a pale wash of sky, spilling thin gold light across a farm that had clearly seen better years. Sunrise Therapy Center stood quiet in that light-patched fences leaning in uneven lines, a weathered wooden sign with peeling paint, and a barn whose boards carried the gray scars of too many winters. Nothing about the place looked rich. Nothing about it looked important. But to the families who drove hours to reach it, this small farm was the last place hope still lived. A few chickens wandered near the fence line. A rusted gate creaked whenever the wind moved through the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a pickup truck rattled past on the gravel road and disappeared again into the open countryside. For a moment, everything was still. Then something enormous and polished rolled into view. The engine was quiet, powerful too refined for a road like this. Chrome flashed in the morning sun as a long, immaculate equine transport rig eased off the county highway and onto the narrow dirt lane that led to the farm. It looked like a limousine had wandered into a junkyard. Inside the cab, David Mercer leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting at the screen of his GPS. No, that can't be right, he muttered. The signal bars flickered weakly. Out here, cell reception was a rumor more than a service. His navigation had dropped twice already on the drive in. Each time it had recalculated, rerouted, corrected itself like it knew what it was doing. But the address still said the same thing. Sunrise, County Road 18. David exhaled slowly. He checked the printed paperwork again. The destination listed at the top read, Sunrise Elite Equestrian, Private Training Estate. But the GPS map had dragged him down a different branch of the same county road. Apparently, two old ranch properties still shared the original address line from decades ago, long before satellite navigation tried to make sense of rural America. One sunrise, two farms, and a mistake that was about to cost someone dearly. David stepped out of the cab and the gravel crunched beneath his boots. The morning air was cool and smelled faintly of hay and damp earth. He looked around. No manicured paddocks, no polished training arenas, no million-dollar barns. Just a tired little therapy farm trying its best to stay standing. Great, he whispered under his breath. Just great. Behind him, the trailer shifted softly. A powerful presence moved inside the steel walls. David walked to the back, released the latch, and lowered the ramp. The sound echoed across the quiet farm. Inside the trailer stood a horse that belonged in a completely different world. Thunder stepped forward. He was massive, black as wet stone. Muscles smooth and powerful beneath a flawless coat that caught the rising sun like polished glass. The tack alone probably cost more than the entire fence line surrounding the property. This was a show horse, an elite jumper, the kind of animal bred for arenas, championships, and crowds who paid thousands just to watch him fly. But when Thunder's hooves touched the ground, something about him felt wrong. Not physically. Physically, he was magnificent. But his eyes were empty, not wild, not angry, just hollow, like someone had turned the lights off behind them. David felt a strange chill move up his spine. He glanced again at the paperwork in his hand. The bold red stamp across the top page seemed to glare at him. $200,000 returned. 3 times unpredictable refuses to jump. Spirit broken. David swallowed. Yeah, he muttered quietly. That's not a label you want following you around. Thunder stood still beside the ramp. Perfect posture, perfect silence. But his body was tight, every muscle held in invisible tension, not like an athlete ready to run, more like a soldier waiting for the next explosion. A loose metal buckle on the trailer door shifted and clinked softly in the breeze. The reaction was instant. Thunder flinched. Not a startle, a flinch. Sharp, deep, the kind of reaction that comes from memory. David stared at the horse for a long second. Easy, big guy, he said quietly, though the horse hadn't moved again. The farm door creaked open across the yard. A young woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a faded work jacket. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, strands escaping in the wind. There was dirt on her boots and determination in the way she walked. Alara Bennett had spent most of her adult life trying to keep Sunrise Therapy Center alive. She stopped halfway across the yard. Her eyes moved from the gleaming transport truck to the horse standing beside it. The contrast made her blink. Can I help you?" she called. David lifted the paperwork. "I think," he said slowly, "I may have made a very expensive mistake." Alara approached carefully. The closer she got, the clearer the horse became. Thunder was breathtaking, but something about him made her chest tighten. Animals didn't hide pain the way people did, and this one was hiding something enormous. She stopped a few feet away. Thunder didn't move, didn't look at her, didn't react. Just stood there like a statue carved from black stone. Alara studied his face, then his eyes, then the subtle tremor running through the muscles near his jaw. The silence stretched. Finally she spoke, softly, almost to herself. "That horse looks finished." David rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "You're telling me?" He held up the paperwork. "This guy's supposed to be heading to Sunrise Elite Equestrian. GPS dropped signal back on the highway and rerouted me here instead." He gestured at the property. 2 Sunrises, same county road. System must have auto-corrected the wrong one. Thunder shifted his weight slightly. The movement was small, but it carried the heavy caution of an animal that had learned the world was not always kind. Alara didn't look away from him. She stepped a little closer, not reaching, just observing. The horse's breathing was shallow. His ears flicked once, then went still again. Something deep in Alara's chest recognized what she was seeing. This wasn't stubbornness. This wasn't aggression. This was exhaustion, the kind that lives in the bones. David stared down at the paperwork again and felt his stomach drop. "If dispatch realizes I dropped a $200,000 jumper at the wrong farm," he muttered, his voice lowered to a whisper, "they're going to blame me for this." Thunder's eyes remained fixed somewhere far away. Alara studied them for another long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet certainty that made even David look up. "Whatever happened to you," she said gently to the horse, "happened on purpose." The wind moved softly through the broken fence line. Thunder didn't respond, but for the first time since stepping off the trailer, he blinked. After the transport trailer fell silent, Sunrise Therapy Center went back to doing what it always did: surviving. Morning light slid across patched fencing, peeling paint, and a barn that looked like it had been repaired more times than anyone could count. Nothing on the property matched. Boards had been replaced one at a time. Buckets were dented. The gravel path was uneven. Even the welcome sign out front had faded under too many summers. But every inch of the place carried the same stubborn truth. Someone had refused to let it die. Alara Bennett lived inside that refusal. She stepped into the tiny office just off the barn and placed Thunder's paperwork on a desk already crowded with unpaid invoices, feed receipts, and 2 unopened envelopes marked "Past Due." A rejection letter from a family grant program sat beneath her coffee mug, folded once, then folded again, as if making it smaller might make it hurt less. On the wall hung an old framed photograph of her mother, smiling beside one of Sunrise's first therapy horses. Back then, the farm had been poor too, but it had not felt this close to breaking. Alara looked at the bills for only a second before turning away. She already knew the numbers. Hay costs were up. The farrier was waiting. The water heater in the south stall still needed repair. One more bad month, one more lost donor, one more emergency expense, and the whole place could tip from fragile into finished. Outside, she could hear the restless shift of weight inside the yard. Thunder, A $200,000 horse standing on a property that could barely keep enough cash on hand to replace broken fence posts. The door opened behind her. Maya came in carrying a toolbox under one arm and a spool of wire in the other. She stopped the moment she saw the paperwork. That can't be good. Ilara gave a tired laugh. It gets worse the longer you read. Maya set the toolbox down and scanned the first page. Her eyes moved over the price, the return history, the behavioral notes. Then she looked up. Returned 3 times in 8 months. Maya shook her head slowly. Who does that to a horse? People who can afford to call it a transaction, Ilara said. Maya kept reading. Unpredictable. Refuses to jump. Spirit broken. That last line settled between them like a judgment that had stopped pretending to be medical. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the barn wall. Maya lowered the papers. So, what's the plan? Ilara folded her arms. The plan is simple. We contact the real owner, correct the address, and get him off this farm before this turns into a legal disaster. It sounded clean. It sounded smart. It sounded like the kind of decision a person made when they still believed life could be managed with logic alone. But Sunrise was not built on logic. It was built on need. Families brought children here because hospitals had waiting lists. Specialists were hours away, and insurance companies knew how to say no in 12 different professional tones. Sunrise served kids who could not regulate fear, grief, panic, or trust. Kids who did not bloom under fluorescent lights and clipboards. Kids who needed room, quiet, patience, and something alive enough to meet them without judgment. If the farm went under, the loss would not just be financial. It would be human. Maya leaned against the desk. How bad are we? Ilara looked at the bills again. Bad enough that I counted feed scoops this morning. Maya didn't answer right away. That was the kind of sentence that didn't need explanation. A volunteer hurried past the office window carrying therapy cones. Somewhere near the paddock, an old hose coughed and sputtered. Sunrise moved the way it always moved, one small crisis balanced on top of another. That was Ilara's real exhaustion. Not drama, not panic, just relentless strain. She fixed what she could, reused what she couldn't replace, smiled for donors, softened bad news for parents, stayed up too late writing grant applications that usually ended in polite rejection. Every day she held the farm together with planning, sacrifice, and the private terror that if she loosened her grip for 1 second, everything her mother built would disappear. Maya watched her carefully. You're spiraling ahead again, she said. Ilara looked up. I'm being realistic. You're trying to solve 5 disasters before noon. That's because we have 5 disasters before noon. 6 now, Maya said. The horse counts. Despite herself, Ilara let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Then the sound came from outside. A metallic rattle. Sharp. Small. Both women turned toward the window. David had shifted something near the trailer. Thunder reacted instantly. His head lifted. His neck locked. His entire body went still in a way that felt worse than panic. Panic moved. This was something colder, deeper, a total bracing of the nervous system, as if one ordinary sound had reached into an old wound and squeezed. Ilara was outside before she fully thought about it. David stepped back at the look on her face. I barely touched it. I know, she said. Thunder stood near the trailer ramp, perfectly motionless, but the tension in him was visible now. His nostrils had tightened. His breathing had gone shallow again. Up close, he no longer looked proud or difficult or dangerous. He looked tired in the most serious sense of the word. Not travel tired. Not training tired. Soul tired. Ilara stopped several feet away and kept her voice low. No one's asking anything from you. The horse did not turn toward her, but he listened. Sometimes listening was the first sign a creature had not fully given up. David rubbed the back of his neck and glanced at his phone. Dispatch still can't get a clean line to the estate. They're trying. I'm trying. Nobody wants to own this mistake. His voice dropped. If the client makes enough noise, they'll pin this on me. Elara believed him. That was the ugly thing about systems. They were built to protect money first and people last. She looked at the black horse again. His coat gleamed in the morning sun. His gear was expensive. From a distance, he looked like wealth. Standing there in silence, he looked like damage. Maya came up beside her. "We can't keep him," she murmured. "I know. We're one bad week from not making payroll. I know. He's not ours." Elara didn't answer. Because that was the problem. Thunder was not theirs. But Pain was. Pain had landed here every day for years in one form or another, children carrying fear in small bodies, parents carrying guilt they did not deserve, animals carrying histories no one had handled gently enough. Sunrise did not exist because life was fair. It existed because broken things still needed somewhere to go. And right now, a broken horse was standing in the yard like a test she had not asked for. If she left him in the trailer for hours, that would be cruel. If she forced him onward while he was shut down, that would be cruel. If she treated him like freight because the paperwork said he was expensive, that would be cruel. Elara closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "One night," she said. David blinked. "What?" "He stays one night, until we reach the owner and sort this out properly." Maya turned to her. "Elara, he's not staying in that trailer." David stared at her like she had just volunteered to hold a lit fuse. "I don't know if I'm allowed to agree to that." Elara met his eyes. "You weren't allowed to bring him here either." That hit. The wind moved through the yard. Dust shifted around Thunder's hooves. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and went quiet. David looked at the horse. Really looked at him. At the rigid frame, the hollow eyes, the strange disciplined stillness that no healthy animal should have worn like armor. His shoulders dropped. "One night," he said softly. Maya exhaled through her nose, not because she liked the decision, but because she knew it had already become inevitable. The moment had that feeling, that dangerous kind of certainty. Elara stepped toward Thunder and reached for the lead rope with slow, visible care, giving him every chance to resist. He didn't. He only trembled once beneath the skin. A tiny shiver. So small most people would have missed it. But Elara felt it travel through the rope into her hand. And in that instant she understood the real danger. Not the lawsuit, not the owner, not the money. The real danger was that she already cared, which meant this was no longer a shipping problem. It was becoming personal. And at sunrise, the things that became personal had a way of changing everything. The afternoon arrived quietly at Sunrise Therapy Center. By then, the transport trailer had been parked beside the barn, its polished steel sides reflecting a farm that looked nothing like the world it had come from. The contrast still felt strange. A machine built for elite arenas now stood beside a crooked fence and a water trough patched with sealant. Thunder had not resisted when Elara led him into the paddock. But he had not relaxed either. He moved with careful obedience, each step controlled, each movement measured. Not the fluid confidence of a trained jumper. This was something else. A body that had learned the safest way to survive was to do exactly what was expected and nothing more. Now he stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree near the fence line. Perfect posture, perfect silence, perfect distance from everything. Elara leaned on the paddock rail and watched him. For the past hour she had offered water, fresh hay, space. Thunder had refused all three. He simply stood there with his weight balanced forward, ears flicking occasionally, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the horizon, as if the present moment were a place he did not quite trust yet. Behind her, Maya closed the barn door and wiped dust from her hands. He moved? No. Drank? No. Blinking, at least? Barely. Maya sighed and stepped beside her at the rail. That's not stubborn, she said quietly. I know. They stood in silence a moment longer. Thunder shifted slightly, just enough to rebalance his weight. His muscles remained tight under the glossy black coat, every line of him ready for pressure that never came. P-T-S-D, Maya said finally. Elara glanced sideways. In a horse? You'd be surprised how often it happens, Maya replied. You push an animal past fear long enough, they stop reacting. They stop fighting. Eventually, they stop expecting anything good to happen at all. Elara watched Thunder again. Like they shut down. Exactly. The wind stirred through the branches overhead, scattering small leaves across the dirt. From the driveway came the sound of a car engine approaching. Elara turned. A small blue sedan rolled slowly toward the barn and parked near the therapy entrance. The driver stepped out first, a tired-looking woman in her 30s, holding a backpack in one hand and a folder of therapy notes in the other. A boy followed her from the passenger side. He moved carefully, as if the world were louder for him than it was for everyone else. Leo Alvarez was 9 years old. At school, he rarely spoke. In crowded rooms, he folded inward like a closed book. But at sunrise, he had begun doing something remarkable. He stayed. The boy walked beside his mother toward the barn entrance, one hand gripping the strap of his backpack. His dark eyes scanned the yard quickly, absorbing every detail the way some children did when the world felt unpredictable. His mother waved to Elara. Sorry we're a little early. That's okay, Elara called back gently. Leo stopped walking. His gaze had locked onto the paddock. Specifically, onto Thunder. The horse still stood beneath the oak tree, unmoving, distant, lost somewhere behind those dark, empty eyes. Leo stared. Elara felt Maya shift beside her. That might not be the best introduction, Maya murmured. Elara hesitated, because normally therapy sessions followed careful routines, predictable patterns, familiar horses the children already trusted. Thunder was neither predictable nor familiar. But Leo had already started walking, not toward the barn, toward the paddock. Leo, his mother called softly. Sweetheart, wait. He didn't. The boy approached the fence slowly, each step deliberate like he was listening to something no one else could hear. Thunder noticed him. One ear turned first, then the other. His head lifted slightly, but he did not move away. Elara felt the tension rise quietly in her chest. She stepped forward, ready to intervene if the horse startled. Leo reached the fence. He didn't climb it, didn't wave his arms, didn't call out. He simply stood there, looking at Thunder with a calm, searching expression. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind passed through the paddock. Dust drifted lightly across the ground. Thunder watched the boy. Then something small shifted. The horse lowered his head. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to bring his gaze down closer to the boy's height. Elara held her breath. Leo slowly lifted one hand and rested it on the top rail of the fence. Still no sudden movements. Still no sound. He looked into Thunder's eyes. And then he spoke. The voice was quiet, fragile, but clear. You're sad. The words seemed to hang in the air. Leo tilted his head slightly, studying the massive animal in front of him. I get sad too, he said. Thunder didn't move, but his ears softened forward. The boy reached his hand through the fence. Not fast, just gently enough to touch the edge of the horse's muzzle. For one heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Thunder froze. Elara felt every nerve in her body prepare to step forward, but the horse did not pull away. Leo's fingers rested against the warm velvet of Thunder's nose. The boy spoke again, as if explaining something important. But it's okay here. The words were simple, but something inside them carried weight. Thunder inhaled sharply. Then, for the first time since arriving, the horse exhaled, a long breath, deep, shaking. The tension in his neck loosened a fraction. His eyes blinked. Once, then again. Elara felt a strange pressure build behind her ribs. Maya whispered beside her, barely audible. "Well, I'll be damned." Leo kept his hand on the horse's muzzle, perfectly calm. Thunder did not retreat. He did not brace. He simply stood there, breathing. Two creatures who both knew what it felt like to live inside noise the rest of the world could not hear. Behind them, Leo's mother covered her mouth with one hand. "I've never seen him walk up to a horse like that," she whispered. Elara didn't answer, because she was watching something unfold that no training manual could have predicted. Thunder's body shifted slightly. Not backward, forward. Just half a step, enough to close the distance. The massive horse lowered his head again, bringing his face level with the small boy standing at the fence. Leo smiled faintly, not the loud excitement children usually showed around animals. Just recognition, like meeting someone who spoke the same quiet language. Maya slowly unfolded the paperwork she had brought outside earlier. Her eyes moved across the printed notes again. "No whips," she murmured. "No spurs. Risk of full shutdown under pressure." She lowered the page. "That horse isn't stubborn." Elara nodded slowly. "He's wounded." The breeze shifted again. Leo's fingers traced the line of Thunder's nose. The horse blinked once more. And in that small moment, something inside him, something buried under months of pressure and confusion and punishment, flickered faintly back to life. Not trust. Not yet. But awareness. The first fragile spark of it. Elara watched the two of them in silence, and a realization settled quietly into her chest. This had stopped being a delivery mistake. The universe had placed something broken at her door. And somehow, the first person who had managed to reach it was a boy the world often overlooked. Elara looked at Thunder again, then at Leo, and the thought formed before she could stop it. Maybe this horse had not been delivered to the wrong place at all. The afternoon stretched slowly across Sunrise Therapy Center. The sun drifted lower, pouring warm light through the branches above the paddock. Dust moved lazily in the air. Somewhere behind the barn, a screen door creaked open and shut. The quiet rhythm of the farm continued, steady and patient, as if it had learned long ago that most healing happened in silence. Thunder still stood beneath the oak tree, but he was no longer the same statue that had stepped off the trailer that morning. Now and then he moved, small movements, careful ones, a shift of weight, a slow blink, the subtle turn of an ear toward the sounds of children laughing near the therapy arena. They were tiny changes, but Elara noticed every one of them. She leaned against the paddock rail, watching the horse with the same careful attention she gave every wounded animal that arrived at sunrise. There was always a moment when instinct started whispering clues. You learned to listen for it. Maya stepped into the paddock beside her, carrying a small bucket of fresh water. "He still hasn't touched the hay," she said. "I saw. He's drinking at least." "Barely." Thunder lowered his head to the bucket for a moment, took a cautious sip, then lifted it again as if expecting something unpleasant to follow. Nothing did. The quiet held. Maya studied the horse for another few seconds before speaking. "Look at his mouth." Elara stepped closer. At first glance, Thunder looked flawless, sleek coat, powerful build, perfectly balanced legs. But when the horse turned his head slightly, the light caught the corners of his mouth. Old scars, thin, pale lines where the skin had split and healed again. Bit damage. Elara's stomach tightened. "That wasn't a gentle rider," Maya murmured. Thunder shifted again, muscles tightening beneath the glossy black coat. It was a strange kind of tension, not the loose readiness of an athlete, but something harder, locked down like a door that had been bolted too many times. "See his shoulders?" Maya added quietly. "That's competition muscle. This horse was trained hard. Too hard." Thunder lowered his head again, but he didn't relax. His neck stayed tight. His ears flicked at the slightest sound. And one more thing stood out. "He hasn't laid down," Elara said. Maya nodded. "Horses that feel safe will rest. Roll in the dirt, stretch out. This guy's been standing all day." Thunder stood there in the fading sunlight, elegant and disciplined and painfully still. He wasn't resting. He was enduring. The first clue settled into place. Heart. Evidence not of rebellion, but of damage. A voice called from across the yard. "Elara." David hurried toward them from the transport truck, phone pressed to his ear. His expression had changed since morning. The uneasy confusion was gone. Now he looked worried. He ended the call and ran a hand through his hair. "Dispatch finally got through to the estate office." "And?" Elara asked. "They're not happy." "That makes two of us." David didn't smile. "The owner's name is Richard Vance." Maya raised an eyebrow. "The Richard Vance." David nodded grimly. "That's the one." Even Elara had heard the name. Richard Vance was the kind of billionaire who appeared in magazines beside glossy photographs of championship horses and world-class show arenas. The kind of man who measured success in trophies and seconds shaved off a jumping course. "He's high profile," David continued, "and according to dispatch, this horse was supposed to arrive hours ago." Thunder flicked an ear toward the conversation but did not move. David lowered his voice. "They told me to correct the delivery immediately." Elara crossed her arms. "Immediately? How?" "They want the horse back in the trailer as soon as possible." Maya glanced toward Thunder. "Yeah, that's not going to go well." David nodded. "You think I don't know that?" He looked at the horse again, then back at Elara. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "they'll bury me." The words were not dramatic. They were factual. The second clue settled into place. Danger. Time, pressure had arrived, and it belonged to someone powerful enough to make everyone nervous. Maya exhaled slowly and looked down at the paperwork she had brought from the office. "Let me check something." She pulled out her phone and crouched near Thunder, careful not to startle him. Her fingers moved gently along the horse's neck until she found the small ridge beneath the skin where the microchip scanner could read. The device beeped softly. Maya read the number and typed it into the registry database. A moment later, the results appeared. "Well," she said quietly, "that confirms it." "Richard Vance," Elara said. "Owner of Record." David shifted uneasily. "Dispatch mentioned something else, too." "What?" "He's been trying to sell the horse." Elara frowned. "Trying?" 3 different buyers returned him. Maya scrolled further down the registry notes. 8 months, she said. 3 returns in 8 months. Elara felt the pattern forming. "What about the trainer?" Maya kept reading. Her eyes narrowed. "Interesting." "What?" "There's a handler listed here. Professional competition trainer assigned to Vance's program." "And?" Maya turned the phone screen toward her. A short note appeared in the internal remarks section. "Flagged for excessive correction during training sessions," followed by another line. "Handler reassigned. No explanation, no details. Just moved quietly out of the record." Proof. The third clue settled into place. Not stubbornness, not failure. A system that had pushed too hard and then quietly stepped away from the damage. Thunder lifted his head again, watching the 3 humans beside the fence. The horse did not understand paperwork. But animals always understood tension. Elara looked at the phone screen one more time, then back at the horse. "Someone broke him," she said softly. Maya nodded. "And someone else decided that was easier than fixing it." The wind stirred the paddock dust again. Across the yard, Leo sat on the therapy bench drawing quietly in a notebook while his mother spoke with one of the volunteers. Every few seconds, the boy glanced up toward Thunder, as if checking that the horse was still there. Thunder noticed. His ears turned toward the child again. Another small change. Another quiet step away from shutdown. Ilara looked at the horse, then at the paperwork, then at David. "Give me the number," she said. David blinked. "What?" "The estate office." "You're calling them?" "Yes." Maya straightened slowly. "That's going to attract attention." Ilara nodded. "I know. People with Richard Vance's money don't like problems." "I know." Thunder shifted again, his hooves stirring the dirt. The horse had arrived like a shipping mistake. But now the story was beginning to show its shape. A damaged animal, a powerful owner, a system that preferred silence over responsibility. Ilara held out her hand. David hesitated only a moment before handing over the number. As she dialed, Maya watched her carefully. "Once you make that call," Maya said quietly, "someone's going to come looking." Ilara listened to the phone ringing on the other end of the line. "Yes," she said, "I know." Because sometimes doing the right thing meant inviting trouble to your own door. And Sunrise Therapy Center had just done exactly that. The next morning at Sunrise Therapy Center arrived colder than the one before. A gray sky hung low over the hills, and the wind carried the dry smell of dust and hay across the paddocks. The farm woke the way it always did, quietly, stubbornly before the rest of the world remembered it existed. Ilara had barely slept. The phone call the day before had been short, professional, carefully polite, and completely without warmth. The voice from Richard Vance's office had listened to her explanation, asked several precise questions about the horse's condition, and then ended the call with one simple statement. "Someone will come retrieve the animal." Not the horse. The animal. That single word had stayed with Ilara through the night. Now she stood beside the paddock fence again, watching Thunder under the oak tree. The horse looked slightly different in the early light. Not healed, not relaxed, but no longer entirely shut down. He had drunk more water overnight. He had even taken a few cautious bites of hay when no one was watching. Small victories. The kind Sunrise had always been built on. Maya stepped out of the barn carrying a clipboard and a mug of coffee that looked far too small for the morning they were about to have. "They called again?" she asked. Ilara nodded. "Someone's on the way." Maya blew out a breath. "Of course they are." Across the paddock, Thunder shifted his weight. The horse's ears turned toward the sound of children arriving near the therapy arena. A volunteer opened the gate for one of the families. Leo's mother stepped out of her car with the boy beside her. Leo immediately looked toward the paddock. Thunder noticed. For a brief second, the horse's posture softened. Ilara saw it. And that made the next moment even harder, because the black SUV rolled into the driveway right then. The vehicle looked just as out of place as the transport truck had the day before. Sleek, dark, expensive enough to make the gravel road look embarrassed. It stopped near the barn. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Her clothes were crisp, tailored. Her posture straight. Everything about her moved with the calm efficiency of someone who spent her life solving problems for powerful people. She carried a leather folder under one arm. And she did not smile. Ilara walked toward her. "Can I help you?" The woman extended her hand. "Gwen Hale," she said, "Operations Manager for Mr. Richard Vance." Ilara shook it. "You're here about Thunder." Gwen nodded once. "We're here to correct the shipping error." The words were delivered smoothly, like the situation was nothing more than a misplaced package. Behind them, Maya joined Ilara near the barn steps. Gwen opened the leather folder and produced a document. "This horse is registered under Mr. Vance's private training program," she explained calmly. "Your facility is not listed as an authorized holding location." Her eyes moved briefly toward the paddock. "We'll be loading him back into the trailer now." The sentence landed like a quiet order. Maya crossed her arms. "Have you looked at him yet?" Gwen glanced toward the paddock again. "I'm familiar with the animal's record." That wasn't the question. For a moment, the air between them tightened. Gwen turned fully toward the paddock this time. Thunder stood near the oak tree, still and watchful. But the moment he noticed the unfamiliar figure approaching the gate, his body reacted. His neck stiffened. His breathing shortened. The tension rushed back into him like an old memory. Gwen noticed the change, but didn't interpret it. She simply stepped closer to the fence. "Yes," she said calmly. "That looks consistent with the reports." Ilara felt something twist in her chest. "Reports?" "Behavioral instability," Gwen replied. "Refusal to perform under training pressure." She closed the folder again. "Which is why Mr. Vance has already decided the horse will be moved to a retirement facility." The words sounded almost generous, but the tone behind them was colder. "He's no longer useful in competition." Useful. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Gwen reached toward the gate latch. "We'll load him now." Thunder saw the movement. The metal latch clicked, and the horse froze. Not a startled jump, not a defensive step, a shutdown. His entire body locked in place. His eyes went distant again. Every muscle tightened like iron beneath his skin. Ilara stepped forward instantly. "Stop." Gwen looked at her. "We're not harming him." "You're triggering him." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Miss Bennett, this horse has been handled by world-class trainers, I assure you. Look at him." For the first time, Gwen truly studied the horse. Thunder stood completely motionless. Too motionless, like a statue bracing for impact. Maya spoke quietly beside Ilara. "That's trauma." Gwen's expression didn't change. "It's non-compliance." Then another voice spoke. Small, clear. "Don't." Everyone turned. Leo stood near the paddock fence. The boy had walked over without anyone noticing. His small body was positioned directly between Thunder and the gate. Leo looked up at Gwen with serious eyes. "He's scared." Thunder's ears flicked faintly toward the boy. Gwen frowned. "Please, step aside." Leo didn't move. The boy simply rested his hand against the fence rail the way he had the day before. Thunder's breathing slowed slightly. Ilara felt the moment tightening around all of them. Gwen reached for the gate again. Leo stepped forward. Not aggressively. Just enough to block the opening. A 9-year-old boy standing between a frightened horse and a system that wanted to move him like cargo. Ilara spoke before the moment broke. "He stays tonight." Gwen turned toward her. "That is not your decision." Ilara held her ground. "Call the police if you want." Maya went very still beside her. "You're serious?" Gwen asked. "Yes." The wind pushed across the yard, stirring dust at their feet. Thunder stood behind Leo now, his head lowered slightly toward the boy. For the first time since Gwen had arrived, the horse's body had softened again. Leo rested his hand on the fence. "It's okay," he whispered quietly. Thunder exhaled. Gwen watched the scene for several seconds. Then she looked back at Ilara. "You understand that interfering with the recovery of a privately owned animal could have legal consequences." "I understand." "You could be held financially responsible for any damages." "I understand." Gwen studied her for a long moment. Most people backed down when money entered the conversation. Fear usually won quickly. But Ilara Bennett had spent years building a place that existed precisely because fear had already taken too much from too many people. She did not move. "He stays tonight," she repeated. The silence stretched. Finally, Gwen closed the folder slowly. "Very well," she said. "But Mr. Vance will want to see this himself." Ilara nodded once. "Good." Gwen turned toward the SUV. I'll inform him he should come personally." She paused before opening the door and looked back at the paddock. Thunder stood beside Leo now, breathing steadily. For the first time since arriving, the horse did not look like an object waiting to be transported. He looked like something beginning to wake up. Gwen slid into the vehicle and closed the door. The SUV engine started. Gravel crunched as it pulled away from the barn. Maya let out the breath she had been holding. "Well," she said quietly, "that escalated." Ilara watched the road where the vehicle disappeared beyond the hill. "Yes," she said, "it did." Behind her, Leo rested his hand against Thunder's muzzle again. The horse leaned forward slightly. Trust, just the smallest beginning of it. But Ilara knew something else had begun as well. Richard Vance was coming. And when powerful men came looking for answers, quiet farms like Sunrise rarely stayed quiet for long. The morning after Gwen Hale's visit arrived softer than anyone expected. The sky was pale blue, the wind lighter, the farm moving again through its quiet rhythm of chores and therapy sessions. Sunrise Therapy Center had learned something over the years. Storms came, storms passed, and the only way forward was to keep working. Ilara was already in the barn when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the open doors. Thunder stood in the stall she had prepared for him the night before. Fresh shavings covered the ground. A clean bucket of water rested near the wall. The door had been left open so he could see the paddock outside. Nothing forced, nothing demanded. Just space. The horse lifted his head slightly when Ilara stepped in, but he didn't retreat. That alone felt like progress. "Morning," she said quietly. Her voice carried the calm tone she used with every nervous animal at sunrise. Not cheerful, not commanding, just present. Thunder watched her. The horse still held tension in his neck, but the tightness had eased slightly. The lines around his eyes no longer looked quite as distant as they had the day he arrived. Ilara moved slowly across the stall and placed a small pile of hay near the wall. "You don't have to perform here," she murmured. Thunder lowered his head and sniffed the hay. This time, he took a bite. Outside the barn, Maya was already setting up the therapy arena. Orange cones, foam blocks, and a low wooden platform formed a small obstacle course used for balance exercises. It wasn't glamorous work, but it changed lives in quiet ways most people never noticed. She heard Ilara step out behind her. "He eat?" Maya asked. "A little." "That's improvement. Don't celebrate yet." Maya shrugged. "At sunrise, we celebrate crumbs." Ilara couldn't argue with that. Across the yard, a police cruiser rolled slowly into the gravel drive and stopped near the barn. Deputy Carson Reyes stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun. He was a familiar face around the farm. Carson had grown up in the same county. He knew Sunrise well enough to understand that most of the problems that appeared here weren't crimes. They were human situations. "Mornin'," he said as he approached. "Morning, Carson," Maya replied. He nodded toward the barn. "That the famous horse?" "Word travels fast." "Small town." Carson leaned casually against the fence and looked toward the stall door where Thunder stood watching them. "He looks calmer than I expected." Ilara joined them. "We're giving him space." "Good call." Carson's tone shifted slightly. "I heard from the county office that Richard Vance might be visiting." "That's what his manager said." The deputy scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "Well, when billionaires start showing up in rural counties, paperwork tends to follow." Ilara smiled faintly. "Are we in trouble?" "Not yet," Carson said. "But if anyone tries to push you legally, document everything." Maya lifted the clipboard she had been carrying. "Already doing that." Inside the barn, Thunder shifted and stepped forward cautiously. The horse crossed the stall and paused near the open door, watching the people outside. His ears moved slowly, tracking their voices. Carson studied him for a moment. "That animal doesn't look dangerous." "No," Ilara said. "He looks tired." The deputy nodded. "Sometimes that's worse." A car door slammed somewhere near the therapy entrance. Children's voices drifted across the yard. The morning session was beginning. Leo arrived a few minutes later, walking beside his mother with the same quiet awareness he always carried. The moment he saw Thunder in the stall doorway, the boy slowed. Thunder noticed, too. The horse lifted his head and turned slightly toward the child. Elara opened the stall gate halfway. Leo approached slowly, stopping just outside the doorway. Neither of them rushed. Neither of them spoke right away. Leo placed one hand lightly on the wooden rail. Thunder stepped forward. Not a big movement, just one careful step. Leo reached out and rested his fingers against the horse's muzzle. The same gesture from the day before. Thunder breathed out slowly. Carson watched from the fence. "Well," he murmured. "That's something." Elara nodded. "Yes." The therapy session began nearby. One of the volunteers guided a young girl with cerebral palsy toward the arena. Her legs moved stiffly, but determination showed in every step. Elara glanced at Thunder. "Let's see something." She walked carefully into the stall and clipped a loose lead rope to the horse's halter. Not pulling, just guiding. Thunder hesitated for half a second. Then followed. They moved slowly into the paddock beside the therapy arena. The little girl watched with wide eyes. "That horse is big," she whispered. Elara knelt beside her. "Do you want to meet him?" The girl nodded. Thunder lowered his head automatically as they approached. The girl reached out carefully and touched the horse's neck. Thunder stood completely still. No flinching, no tension, just patience. A volunteer nearby helped another child with Down syndrome approach the fence. The boy laughed softly and ran his fingers through Thunder's mane. Again, the horse remained calm, watching, listening, waiting. Maya leaned toward Carson. "He's different with the kids." "Animals know," Carson said quietly. Across the paddock, Leo still stood beside Thunder, his hand resting lightly against the horse's face. The boy spoke softly. "You're not sad today." Thunder blinked slowly. The sun climbed higher over the barn roof. Time passed. Then something remarkable happened. Thunder walked back into the stall on his own. He circled once, and then, very slowly, lowered himself onto the fresh bedding. Elara stopped in the barn doorway. She hadn't seen the horse lie down once since he arrived. Now he stretched his long legs out beneath him and rested his head against the shavings. The tension in his body melted away. For the first time since the transport truck had rolled into Sunrise, Thunder slept. Not the restless dozing of a frightened animal. Real sleep. Maya stepped quietly beside Elara. "Well," she whispered, "that's a first." Elara watched the massive horse breathing slowly in the stall. He finally feels safe. Outside the barn, Carson glanced toward the road. A faint cloud of dust had appeared on the horizon. A vehicle was approaching. Slow, deliberate. Maya saw it too. "That'll be him," she said. Elara nodded once. The moment they had been waiting for was finally arriving. Richard Vance was coming to Sunrise, and he was about to see what had happened to the horse everyone else had given up on. The black SUV appeared over the rise just after noon. Dust trailed behind it as it rolled slowly down the narrow county road toward Sunrise Therapy Center. The vehicle looked almost unreal against the quiet farmland, sleek, expensive, deliberate. The kind of machine that usually stopped in front of glass buildings, not wooden barns patched with mismatched boards. Elara stood near the paddock fence watching it approach. She had been expecting this moment since Gwen Hale's call the day before. Beside her, Maya folded her arms. "Well," she said quietly, "here we go." The SUV stopped near the barn. The engine shut off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Richard Vance stepped out. He was taller than Elara expected, mid-50s, neatly dressed, posture controlled in the way of someone who spent most of his life walking into rooms where decisions were already waiting for him. He glanced once around the farm, the leaning fence, the weathered barn, the dusty therapy arena. Nothing here looked impressive, and that was exactly why he frowned. Gwen Hale stepped out from the passenger side and spoke to him quietly before gesturing toward the paddock. Richard followed her gaze. Thunder stood near the fence. Leo stood beside him. The horse lowered his head slightly toward the boy. Alara saw the moment Richard noticed. The billionaire's expression didn't soften, but it changed. A fraction. He walked toward them slowly, shoes crunching on gravel. Alara stepped forward to meet him halfway. "Mr. Vance." "Miss Bennett." His voice was calm, professional, the tone of a man used to solving problems quickly. "I understand there was a shipping error," he said. "Yes." "And you decided to keep my horse overnight?" "Yes." His eyes moved past her toward the paddock again. "A jumper that refuses to jump isn't very valuable," he said plainly. "My manager informed you he's already scheduled for retirement." The words were delivered without cruelty, but without sentiment either. Alara nodded. "I know." Richard studied her. "Then I assume you also understand why he needs to leave today." She hesitated only a moment. "Before you decide that, watch him." Richard glanced at Gwen, then back at the paddock. The therapy session had resumed nearby. One of the volunteers guided a small boy with Down syndrome toward the fence where Thunder stood waiting. The child reached up and ran his fingers through the horse's mane. Thunder didn't move, didn't pull away. He simply stood there, breathing slowly. The boy laughed softly. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not a trained response," he said. "No," Alara answered. "It isn't." Across the arena, a girl with cerebral palsy practiced balancing on a therapy block. Thunder watched her carefully as she worked, ears turning toward every sound she made. Leo stood quietly beside the horse. The boy rested one small hand against Thunder's face. Thunder leaned forward, not dramatically. Just enough for his forehead to rest gently against the child's shoulder. Richard noticed that. For the first time since arriving, he didn't speak. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it carried a strange kind of stillness. Thunder lifted his head again. Leo smiled faintly. Then the boy whispered something only the horse could hear. Maya stepped beside Alara and held out the clipboard she had been carrying all morning. "This might explain a few things," she said. Richard took the papers. His eyes moved quickly across the pages. Photographs, vet notes, documentation of scarring around the horse's mouth, records of muscle tension patterns. And the line Maya had highlighted. Handler flagged for excessive correction. The trainer listed beneath it worked under Richard Vance's own competition program. Richard read the line twice, then 3 times. His jaw tightened. "That trainer was reassigned," Gwen said quickly. Richard didn't look at her. "He was moved quietly," Maya replied, which usually means someone didn't want to look too closely. Silence settled over the group. Thunder shifted in the paddock, his ears flicking toward the voices. Richard lowered the papers slowly. "You're suggesting my program caused this?" Alara met his eyes. "I'm saying he didn't break himself." Richard looked back toward the horse. Thunder stood near Leo again. Calm, attentive. Nothing about him resembled the unstable animal described in the official reports. Maya spoke quietly. "Some horses fight when they're pushed too far." Her eyes returned to Thunder. "Others just stop believing they're allowed to feel anything." Richard said nothing. The wind moved gently across the paddock. Dust lifted and drifted along the fence line. Finally, he stepped closer to the gate. Thunder noticed him. The horse turned his head. For a long second, they studied each other. Richard reached out slowly. Thunder hesitated, then stepped forward. The massive horse lowered his head and rested it against the man's chest. The contact lasted only a moment, but it carried a quiet weight no competition arena had ever produced. Richard exhaled slowly. Not surprise. Recognition? He understood something now, not because the horse had offered affection, but because the evidence had already made the truth unavoidable. Thunder had not failed. The system built around him had. Richard stepped back. The horse lifted his head again and returned to Leo's side. Gwen spoke carefully. "Sir, we still need to arrange transport." "No." The word stopped her. Richard looked at Alara. "How much does it cost to keep a horse here?" Alara blinked. "That depends on the horse." "And this one?" She hesitated. "More than we can easily afford." Richard nodded once. "That won't be your problem anymore." Maya frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Richard turned toward the barn, then back toward the paddock. "This horse isn't leaving Sunrise." Alara felt the words settle slowly. "You're giving him to us." "I'm correcting a mistake," Richard said. He looked down at the paperwork again. "My mistake?" Gwen stared at him. "Sir, set up a lifetime care trust for the horse," he continued calmly, "and allocate $50,000 annually to support the therapy program." Maya's eyebrows shot upward. Richard slipped the papers back into the folder. "That money isn't charity," he said quietly. "It's restitution." Thunder flicked his ears toward the voices again. Leo rested his hand against the horse's muzzle. The boy spoke softly. "You're home now." Richard watched the two of them for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The afternoon sun drifted slowly across the paddock. Children laughed in the therapy arena. The old barn stood quietly behind them, weathered but still standing. And for the first time since the transport trailer had arrived on that dusty road, Sunrise Therapy Center felt something new settle into the air. Not tension, not uncertainty. Something warmer, something steady. Because sometimes the miracle wasn't that a broken horse learned to trust again. Sometimes the miracle was that the world finally admitted it had been the one that broke him, and chose to make it right.